The murder of George Floyd, along with the killings of countless black men at the hands of the police, is merely the tip of the iceberg. Below it lies a culture of systemic and institutionalised racism that is hardly ever discussed. Police reform can only achieve so much. To truly eliminate racism, we need to acknowledge racial inequalities and how we may unknowingly be complicit in reproducing them.
And the winner is Sandra Bullock in The Blind Side.
It can be hard to imagine how we might be complicit, and so looking at popular culture is a really good way to start. The Blind Side was one of my favourite films, until I realised that it reproduces a racist narrative that we see all too often. Like many of my friends, I really enjoyed watching The Blind Side, and I've revisited and recommended it time and time again. It's a feel-good film that has a remarkable story, quick pace, witty dialogue, and likeable characters. Unsurprisingly, it was a massive success on release, soon becoming one of the highest-grossing films in Hollywood history before being nominated for 2 Academy Awards. I, along with much of the film's audience, never suspected the film of racism. In fact, the plot arguably served to improve race relations by showing the successful integration of a black child into a white family.
Michael, come on down here and get in the next one. Come on down.
So how is The Blind Side racially problematic? For starters, it underplays the real story of Michael Oher's extraordinary accomplishments. In reality, Michael managed the unthinkable journey from a severely disadvantaged child to a professional athlete, not only because of his white adoptive family, but because of a tremendous personal resilience and the help of several black families along the way.
Any person who would suggest that I would have ended up face down in a gutter somewhere is missing a huge part of the story. The Blind Side is about how one family helped me reach my fullest potential. But what about the people and experiences that all added up to putting me in their path? As anyone in my family will tell you, they were just part of a complicated series of events and personalities that helped me achieve success.
Yet, in the film, the role of black people, including Michael himself, is drowned out and replaced entirely by the perspective of a white family that saves him. Michael is portrayed as passive and childlike, bound to follow the path of his drug-addicted mother and delinquent friends. The only thing that can rescue him from this fate is a white saviour.
Do you have any place to stay tonight? Don't you dare lie to me.
Seen that look many times. She's about to get her way.
Come on.
As Jay Camerotta notes, in such cinematic treatments of race, people of colour appear to lack the agency necessary to enact positive changes in their own lives. The underlying assumption is that people of colour, on their own, fail to enact resilience, resistance and success. Any achievements in these areas seem to result from the initiatives of the white saviour. Furthermore, these Hollywood narratives often miss or ignore how people in communities of colour do successfully resist and overcome marginalisation through self-initiated agency. This is the main reason why Oher originally disliked his portrayal in the film.
You know, I didn't necessarily have to have a wealthy family come take me in or, do some big deal to get a lot of money. I was going to make it regardless, like I said. And, I just tell them, stay positive and, if you want it to happen, it can happen.
Far from being passive, his childhood was defined by hard work, determination and sacrifice. He spent years learning and practicing basketball and football, developing himself into a highly skilled athlete well before he met the Tui family. Yet in the film, it is only through the family's intervention that Michael begins to learn the very basics of American football.
Now, I'll be the running back, and you show me what you're supposed to do. Ready? Hi. You'll block him. You'll hit him. Quarterback will hand it off. He gets the ball, and he takes off. Open lane to the end zone. All there is to it.
On top of this misrepresentation, Oher's character in the film is almost completely silent, undeveloped, and incapable of telling his own story. This means that nearly everything we learn about Michael is said by white characters. A white narrator describes his physical attributes, his white teachers read off his academic record, and his white coaches size up his athletic ability.
Michael Oher gives us no reason to believe that, based on his records, that he would be successful here.
Well, how bad could it be?
We're not exactly sure how old he is due to his lack of records. He has a measured IQ of 80, which is 6th percentile. His grade point average begins with 0.6.
As a consequence of centering the narrative on the Tui family, the viewer is never given the opportunity to learn about the structural forces that impacted Michael's childhood. One of the most important parts of the story that is left out is Michael's schooling and how he suffered at the hands of the system. In the film, we only learn that he was not doing well in school and as a result was kept a few years behind. The audience are left to assume that Michael is failing school and not that school is failing Michael. Yet, the reality is often the other way around. Urban minority schools lack funding, equipment, and teacher experience when compared to their counterparts in wealthier neighbourhoods, and their students' performance suffers as a result. It is no coincidence that black males are consistently the lowest achieving group in America's education system, as Oher's autobiography explains.
They just kept passing me so that they didn't have to deal with me anymore or answer questions as to why I was failing. And it wasn't just me. That was true for so many kids. We would just be held in the classroom for the period and the teacher would go over the material, but nobody, including the teacher, seemed to care if it stuck or not. No one checked for homework or book reports or even gave many tests. When no one around you at school or at home seems to think learning is important, it's pretty hard to think that it is important yourself.
Such institutional failings, as in the film, are often ignored by wider society. Those that are not adversely affected by institutional inequalities may therefore deny that race and racism is related to academic achievement, instead believing that success is based entirely on personal merit. The same idea can be applied to employment. If racism doesn't exist anymore, then surely there's no need for affirmative action or positive discrimination, right? These beliefs are, according to political sociologist Eduardo Bonilla Silva, colorblind. Since racism has evolved over time and is now much more nuanced than the blatant discrimination that we saw in the Jim Crow era, many people claim that they no longer see race, that they are, in fact, colorblind. They argue that modern societies like the US are simply not racist anymore.
Are you saying no, it is not a major problem in this country. No, it is not. My father was a janitor. He was born in the Jim Crow South. Fast forward, my father in his late 40s started a small business, got a little bit of property. This is what happens in America. Raised 3 boys, educated them. We have a thriving black middle class. If black America were a country, Brooke, it would be the 15th wealthiest country in the world. For crying out loud, this is not your grandfather's America. We ought not act like it is.
The problem with this optimistic view is that whilst overt racism like segregation may be a thing of the past, there are still vast racial inequalities in wealth, health, employment, and education. Therefore, we find ourselves in the paradox of racism without racists. The illusion that race doesn't matter anymore becomes a way to explain away racial inequalities and therefore reinforce white supremacy. This is what The Blind Side is guilty of. It actively avoids exploring the reality of racial inequalities that are incredibly important to the story of Michael Oher. Instead, it uses a dominant white perspective to portray a colorblind fiction that subtly reinforces a racist status quo. Thanks for watching. I would encourage you to look back on some of your favourite movies, books, and even conversations with family and friends to try and identify some of your own examples of colourblindness. It is only through acknowledging racism, not ignoring it, that we have any hope of eliminating it. Thank you.